The Prince of Mirkwood, the son of Thranduil, a member of the Fellowship of the Ring, Legolas Greenleaf. Throughout the events of the War of the Ring, he would leave his mark in Middle-earth's history, facing his foes with immense bravery and fortitude. What was his story? What happened to him after the ring's destruction? And what skills did he have? Hello friends, it's Carl here, and in today's episode we'll be exploring the history of Legolas Greenleaf. Now before we discuss this topic, I think it's worth pointing out that the Hobbit movies made significant changes to Legolas's character and history. In fact, Legolas and his mother are never even mentioned in the Hobbit book. Considering this, I'd like to ask you to keep in mind that the books are canon and the movies aren't, and so I'll be sticking to the information found in the books. So Legolas was the son of Thranduil, who was the king of the Elves of Mirkwood. Now there are various types of elves, such as Sylvan Elves and Sindar Elves, though I'll be discussing their differences in another video. What I'd like to point out is that the Elves of Mirkwood were Sylvan Elves, also known as Wood Elves, while Thranduil and his son Legolas were Sindar Elves, and these were considered to be wiser. Now regarding Legolas's mother, we're never told who she was, what sort of elf, and whether she was still alive. We don't even know when Legolas was born, though there are certain hints throughout the books that could give us a rough idea. For example, when Legolas entered the forest of Fangorn, he felt that the forest around him was so old that he almost felt young once again, and this forest had existed since the First Age. We also know that his father Thranduil was at least 2,500 years old when he fought in the Battle of the Last Alliance at the end of the Second Age. And according to Tolkien, most elves got married soon after their 50th year, and they would have kids a few years later. Considering this, it's possible that Legolas was born in the Second Age, and he might have fought alongside his father and grandfather in the Battle of the Last Alliance. Once again, I'd like to clarify that these are my own thoughts, based on the elven customs that Tolkien provided, and so they are inconclusive. However, I think we can confidently say that Legolas was an adult during the events of The Hobbit, considering they took place only 60 years before the War of the Ring, and so it's possible that he actually saw Thorin and company and fought in the Battle of the Five Armies, though it's also plausible that he stayed at home in Mirkwood to rule until his father returned. Anyway, now we can move on to established lore. When the Council of Elrond was held in Rivendell, Thranduil sent out his son Legolas to attend, and he bore with him a message from Mirkwood, for Gandalf had trusted the Elves of Mirkwood to guard Gollum and prevent him from escaping their lands. Though one night, a band of orcs attacked his elven guards, taking them by surprise and slaying them, and so Gollum managed to escape. Legolas was then sent out to inform the council of this news, and he was later chosen to represent the elven race in the Fellowship. He was armed with his bow from Mirkwood, his quiver, and a long white knife, and in his skilled hands these were deadly weapons. When the Fellowship tried to cross the mountain of Caradhras, they faced a terrible storm, with snow 4 feet in depth. Aragorn and Boromir had to push through the snow to create a path, while Legolas was able to nimbly run on top of it, and he was so agile that he barely left a footprint. The storm troubled him little, while the rest of the Fellowship despaired, and he would play a crucial role in their survival, for he ran past Aragorn and Boromir, and he saw that they had almost made it through all the thick snow, which motivated them when they had almost given up all hope. This would allow the Fellowship to escape the mountain of Caradhras, though its alternative would prove to be equally as dangerous, for instead, they would attempt to journey under it, through the dark halls of Moria, and Legolas was reluctant to enter those caverns. As the Fellowship debated on what path to take, they were ambushed by a pack of wargs, though this attack was short-lived, for the wargs fled when Legolas killed a great member of their pack. They would return later that night, surrounding the Fellowship, and the silence was broken by their howls and the sound of battle. This attack was more formidable than the first, and Legolas slew many of the wargs, including a great warg chieftain, by firing an arrow that plunged through its heart. As their chieftain fell to the ground, the wargs fled once again, and the Fellowship made their way through the gates of Moria. In these ancient dwarven ruins, they would come across the tomb of Balin, where they were attacked by orcs, and Legolas had to drag Gimli away from Balin's resting place as the Fellowship fled towards the bridge of Khazad-dûm. They were pursued by a group of orcs, and as Legolas turned, preparing to fire an arrow, he saw something in the distance that caused him to cry out in fear, for a Balrog of Morgoth was after them, and being an elf, he recalled how they were the deadliest foes of his people, save for Sauron himself. Though their situation looked dire, the Fellowship managed to escape the Balrog thanks to Gandalf's sacrifice, and they made their way to Lothlorien. As they approached these elven lands, Legolas sang and told them stories about Lothlorien, and the elves of Lothlorien heard his voice, and they knew that he was one of their kindred, and so they let the Fellowship cross the river unhindered. These elves would trust Legolas more than the rest of the Fellowship, and they chose to speak with him and Frodo first, while the others waited below the trees. The elves of Lothlorien would demand that Gimli must wear a blindfold while traveling through their lands, and to avoid conflict, Aragorn decided that the entire Fellowship would walk blindfolded, though Gimli said that he would be happy if Legolas alone shared his blindness. This obviously angered Legolas, who was keen to see the beauty of Lothlorien, and it wasn't the first time that Gimli and Legolas seemed to be on unfriendly terms, most likely due to the prejudices they had towards one another, since their races often had a strained relationship and they viewed each other with contempt. And yet, oddly enough, this would change after the Fellowship met Galadriel, for Legolas would spend most of his time among the elves of Lothlorien, and he would often bring Gimli with him as they explored the forest together. This sudden change in attitude confused the rest of the Fellowship, for it seemed to come out of nowhere, though I have a theory for this. When the Fellowship met Galadriel, she looked at them in turn and she spoke to them telepathically. I wonder if she might have spoken to Legolas about his relationship with Gimli, how his heart was true, and how Legolas should give his companion a chance and push aside the bitter mistrust that lay between their two races for so long. Through the time they spent together in Lothlorien, Legolas and Gimli became close friends, and when it was time for them to continue their journey, they would travel in the same boat together. Before the Fellowship left Lothlorien, Galadriel gave each of them a gift, and Legolas was given a quiver of arrows and a bow of the Galadrim, which was longer and stronger than his bow of Mirkwood, and it was strung with a string of elf hair. One night, as the Fellowship traveled down the river Anduin, a dark shape appeared in the sky and sped towards the company, filling them with fear, though Legolas stood up and fired an arrow from his new bow of Lothlorien, and it brought this flying creature crashing to the ground. We'd later learn that this was a fell beast and that a Nazgul was riding upon it. The Fellowship would soon have to decide whether they were going to Minas Tirith or if they would travel to Mount Doom to destroy the ring. Though Legolas voted for Minas Tirith, he said that he wouldn't abandon Frodo if he chose to journey to Mordor, and yet soon he would have to do so. For after the Fellowship was broken, Legolas would join Aragorn and Gimli to chase after the orcs that had kidnapped Merry and Pippin, and together they would be known as the Tree Hunters. Throughout their hunt, Legolas would often run ahead of his companions tirelessly, and even when they rested at night, he would stand quietly, gazing in the hobbit's direction. This march left his companions exhausted, and only Legolas seemed unaffected, though according to Tolkien, Legolas would rest in an elven manner, as he was able to rest his mind in elvish dreams while he ran open-eyed in the waking world, and perhaps this allowed him to get sufficient rest. His other elven skills would also prove to be beneficial, such as his eyesight, which allowed him to keep track of the company of orcs, and his vision was so accurate that he was able to count the exact number of Rohirrim and describe their hair and weapons from over 19 miles away. These riders of Rohan were led by Éomer, and he would help the tree hunters by providing them with horses, and Legolas told Gimli to ride with him upon the same horse. He rode in typical elven fashion without using a saddle or rein, and to change direction he only needed to speak to his horse. The Orc Trail would lead the tree hunters to the forest of Fangorn, and this forest would leave its mark upon Legolas, for he was surrounded by ancient trees, and here he almost felt young once again. In Fangorn Forest, the tree hunters would be reunited with an old companion, Gandalf, who had returned as Gandalf the White, and he brought with him a message from Galadriel for Legolas. She warned Legolas to beware of the sea, for if he had to hear the cry of the seagulls, his heart would never find rest in the forest ever again. During the Battle of Helm's Deep, Legolas and Gimli would compete to see who could kill more orcs. At first, Legolas had the advantage, for he slew many orcs with his bow, though after running out of arrows, he had to resort to using his knife. His final tally would be 41, and Gimli would win this competition by slaying 42 orcs, beating Legolas's score by a single kill. During the battle, Gimli had to retreat into the glittering caves, and he was overwhelmed by their beauty. And later, he struck a deal with Legolas that if they both survived the War of the Ring, Legolas would travel with him to the glittering caves, and he in return would join Legolas to visit Fangorn Forest. Following their victory at Helm's Deep, Théoden traveled to Isengard, accompanied by Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli. Here they were reunited with Merry and Pippin, and when Gandalf approached Orthanc to confront Saruman, Legolas joined him to represent the elven race. While in Isengard, Legolas would come face to face with Ents, and he would be left in wonder around these ancient beings. He complimented Treebeard on his forest, and he told him that he hoped to one day journey through Fangorn Forest with his friend Gimli. Legolas would later join Aragorn and his companions as they journeyed through the paths of the dead, and out of the company, he was the only one who was free from fear, for he was not afraid of the spirits of the dead. He was able to see an army of Oathbreakers following them, and he said, "The dead are following. I see shapes of men and of horses, and pale banners like shreds of clouds, and spears like winter tickets on a misty night. The dead are following." Aragorn would lead this company to Pelargir, and with the Oathbreakers' help, they managed to defeat a mighty fleet of Corsair ships and take control of their boats. It would be in Pelargir where Galadriel's prophecy would come to pass, for when Legolas heard the sound of the seagulls, he stood motionless, forgetting the battle that surrounded him, for his heart was suddenly burdened by a strong longing for the sea, to travel to the Undying Lands. And yet, for now, he had to push these dreams aside and go on, and he followed Aragorn upon the Corsair ships as they traveled upriver to land close to the Pelennor fields, where they turned the tide of the battle. Following this victory, the company rested in Minas Tirith for a while, and Legolas said that the houses in the city lacked life, and there was very little nature to be found. He stated that once Aragorn would be crowned king, he would bring him some birds from Mirkwood and trees that do not die. Yet this would have to wait until Sauron was defeated, and Legolas would follow Aragorn and his forces to the Black Gate to distract Sauron and his armies and improve Frodo's chance of making it to Mount Doom unhindered. As they journeyed towards the Black Gate, the forces of the West were filled with a feeling of dread, and Legolas was the only person who could see its cause, for the Nazgul were flying above atop Felbis, out of the sight of mortal eyes. Though the odds seemed to be stacked against them, the host of the West would emerge victorious, and after the ring's destruction, the Fellowship remained in Minas Tirith for a few days. Legolas would later travel with Gimli to the Glittering Caves, where he was left speechless by their beauty, and to set the score, he took Gimli with him to Fangorn Forest, before they travelled to their respective homes of Mirkwood and Erebor. Yet Legolas would not remain in his homeland for long, and he soon led a group of elves to live in the land of Ithilien in Gondor, and over the years it became one of the most beautiful places in Middle-earth. When Aragorn passed away in the year 120 of the Fourth Age, Legolas would finally follow his heart's desire, and he would build a grey ship in Ithilien and sail it down the River Anduin to the sea. Yet he would not go alone, for Gimli travelled with him, and together they would reach the Undying Lands. According to Tolkien, the friendship that Legolas shared with Gimli was greater than any friendship that has ever existed between an elf and a dwarf, and that it is strange that a dwarf would be willing to leave Middle-earth for something they love, or even that he'd be permitted to travel to the Undying Lands. Yet Gimli was allowed to do so because of his friendship with Legolas, and because Galadriel might have obtained permission for him. Throughout his journey, Legolas often wore green and brown clothing, and he was able to sense and hear the feelings of the nature that surrounded him. For example, in Eregion, he could tell that the trees and grass had forgotten the elves that used to live there, though he could also hear the stones mourn their passing. Similarly, in Fangorn, he could hear the voices of the trees calling from a distance, and feel the watchfulness and anger of the trees that surrounded him. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested, check out our Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, Discord, and Loot Crate partnership links in the video description. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.